All right, we got the Jeffrey Epstein files, Iceberg. Let's go. I want to preface this by saying this is only a portion of what is actually included in the files, and there is so much more that I want to talk about. And I'm currently working on pulling together everything I can find, but at the end of the day, it is 3.5 million files, so bear with me. Starting out, we have the missing 2.5 million pages. On January 30th, 2026, the Department of Justice officially released approximately 3.5 million pages of documents related to the Jeffrey Epstein case. But the problem is the DOJ originally identified 6 million potentially responsive pages, which means that half of the files are still being withheld. And honestly, I'm under the impression that there's so much more to this story than just 6 million files in total. I think we're looking at something that has spanned across generations, a network of depravity and exploitation that runs deeper than anything we've ever imagined. Lawmakers like Representative Jamie Raskin and Representative Robert Garcia have publicly accused the DOJ of withholding 50% of the truth. But in reality, they're probably withholding a little more than 50% because the files we do have are currently heavily redacted, with entire sections completely blacked out. The implications are clear. 2.5 million pages we're missing are allegedly where the real names, the current sitting officials, and the most damaging evidence are hidden, and we are just being shown a breadcrumb, or the tip of the iceberg, of what is truly going on here. And I also do want to mention that the DOJ has directly said that they withheld certain items from the release specifically because they depicted actual physical violence against real victims. So I think it's safe to say that there are documents within the files that depict torture and abuse. But so far, despite what social media may tell you, we don't have visual proof of this quite yet. We have documents that kind of point to this, but we don't have any visual proof. It's all redacted. We are only seeing what they are allowing us to see at the moment, and who they are we don't really know. Probably the lizard people, I can't really tell you, but physical violence and torture is there. These people have done some horrible things to other people. We only got about half the story right now, but what we can deduce from this half is still pretty bad. Moving on, we have to talk about the FBI hotline spreadsheet because this is critical to understanding what's real evidence and what's unverified claims. One of the strangest inclusions in the January 2026 release was a detailed spreadsheet officially labeled Exhibit 2020 Log F. This is a raw log of thousands of calls, emails, and online tips submitted to the FBI's National Threat Operations Center and a prosecution hotline between 2019 and 2021, right after Epstein's death and during Ghislaine Maxwell's arrest. Basically, it's two different hotlines anybody can call and claim just about anything. The spreadsheet is hundreds of pages long and filled with unverified claims from the general public. Now, this spreadsheet has some insane allegations in it. It includes everything from legitimate witness testimony to people reporting psychic visions to Donald Trump, the current US president, straight up raping children and auctioning children off based on certain physical attributes, which we'll get into later. It's also worth noting that along with the release, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche issued a statement warning that this specific document contains untrue, unfounded, and sensationalist claims. And according to the DOJ, they only released it because the Epstein Files Transparency Act legally required them to release everything in the investigative file, even the junk data. And as we will soon see as we get deeper into this iceberg, this is where a lot of people get their crazy claims from. They read something from one of these pages and present it as fact, when in reality someone could have just called it and said, hey, they're doing X, Y, and Z, and the DOJ legally had to share it. However, some of the tips on this list actually turned out to be accurate. Details that only insiders would know were buried in this spreadsheet alongside the noise and false claims. We have a blend of fact and falsehoods right in front of us, and we can't really distinguish between the two. So the question then becomes which tips were actually investigated and which ones were dismissed to protect certain individuals. Throughout this video, I'm going to make it clear when something comes from verified documents like sworn testimony, flight logs, or official memos versus when it comes from the FBI hotline, which is basically just a tip line anyone could call. The DOJ dumped everything together, and some people are treating random tips like proven facts. We're not going to do that here. By no means am I just completely writing off what is said in this hotline. However, this distinction is important because at this point, it seems the DOJ is trying to poison the well of sorts by mixing real evidence and sensationalist claims, hoping people dismiss everything as conspiracy, but we're smart cookies. We see through the fog. We're gonna get to the bottom of this. Moving on, we have the body double and decoy tactics. Deep within the newly released jail staff notes and internal memos from the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York, there are descriptions of decoy protocols used on the night of Epstein's death, or the early morning of Epstein's death. The official report states that Epstein died by suicide on August 10th, 2019 in his cell at MCC, but the newly released internal memos reveal that staff members used decoy bodies on gurneys to distract the press and cameras during the removal of Epstein's remains. According to the notes, prison staff deliberately placed bed sheets and boxes arranged to look like bodies on multiple different gurneys and wheeled them out at different times to confuse the media about which gurney actually held Epstein's body. If any, the goal was to avoid media circus and prevent photographs of the actual body being removed. Staff members even admitted in debriefing interviews that they intentionally deceived the cameras and reporters outside the facility about which stretcher contained Epstein's remains, which is honestly kind of understandable. Like, the media is evil, probably not as evil as Epstein himself or some of his associates, but the press can be predatory and exploitive. But then the problem is that when you admit to deliberately deceiving the public about something this significant, you open the door to every other question about what else might be a lie. And I have to include this in this entry, and it's the story of Robert Grijalva. If you've never heard of this guy, basically on August 10th, 2019, the morning Jeffrey Epstein's death was announced, a post appeared on the image board 4chan at 8:16 a.m. It's always 4chan. Nearly 40 minutes before the mainstream media broke the story of Epstein's suicide. An anonymous user claimed to be a first responder at the Metropolitan Correctional Center and detailed the medical procedures that were being performed. The poster described a trip van that arrived without signing in and without having its plate numbers recorded. According to the post, a person dressed in a green military-style outfit was in the back of the van. And then the poster claimed that they don't do transfers on weekends, so this was incredibly weird. The poster then goes on to say that they thought Epstein had been switched out, that someone else's body was put in his place, and for years the author of this post was a mystery, but the SDNY grand jury subpoenas revealed that federal investigators actually tracked the post down, and the subpoena responses point to a real correctional officer, Roberto Grijalva. Roberto Grijalva was indeed on duty at the MCC that morning and was actually one of the officers interviewed during the internal investigation into the guards' negligence. Basically, when Epstein killed himself, the guards were sleeping, evidently. So they had to do a whole investigation on that. Here's the important part though. Grijalva didn't disappear or anything dramatic like that, but if his claims had any truth to them, then he was almost certainly threatened or pressured into silence. And the fact that he posted anonymously on 4chan before the official story broke suggests he saw something that didn't really sit right with him at the time. And then once investigators identified him, he went completely silent. We have not heard anything else from this guy since. No follow-up interviews, no public statements, nothing. Now, we don't know for certain that Grijalva authored the 4chan post, but based on the subpoena trial leading to his Citibank records, it's heavily implied that he was. And the fact that federal prosecutors even went through the trouble of subpoenaing 4chan, Apple, AT&T, and Citibank to identify an anonymous poster tells you that they took whatever was said seriously. And all of this has reignited the Epstein is alive conspiracy, because if the staff was willing to use decoys and actively deceive the public about which gurney held Epstein's remains, then what else are these people lying about? This calls into question a lot about what happened. Were the cameras in Epstein's cell really malfunctioning? I doubt it, honestly. And probably the biggest question, if they were using decoys to confuse the media, how do we know the body that was autopsied was actually Epstein's? The fact that deception was built into the official protocol raises serious questions about the entire investigation. If there weren't serious questions already, I mean, people have been saying Epstein didn't kill himself for years now, so this really just added fuel to the fire. Next up, we have the whole Ball account fiasco. Buried in the financial records of the released documents is a scanned fax showing a wire transfer from one of Epstein's shell companies to an account at Wachovia Bank. The document is partially degraded and looks like it was faxed multiple times, but in the line where it should say bank name, the text appears as ball name. And immediately people saw this and began to latch onto it, claiming it's a deliberate signature referring to Baal, the ancient Canaanite deity associated with child sacrifice, including me. Like, I watched a video on this when the files first dropped, and I was like, oh my goodness, this confirms it. No. In all honesty, it's most likely just a digital scanning error or corrupted fax transmission, and that ball name is a glitch that happened to resemble the word ball, which is honestly pretty disappointing, or good. It's probably better that this was just an error. But just because the account name is most likely an error, I don't want to rule this out entirely. There are other things in these files and in historical records that point toward Epstein and his associates being involved in ritualistic-like practices. First things first, we have Bohemian Grove. This is a real private 2,700 acre campground in California where some of the world's most powerful men, including several people in Epstein's Black Book, meet every July to perform a ceremony they call the cremation of care, where they burn an effigy in front of a 40-foot stone owl statue. Many people believe this owl statue is connected to Moloch, a deity historically associated with child sacrifice. Now, I have to be fair here. Moloch was traditionally depicted as a bull, not an owl, so the connection isn't direct, but the theory's still there, because honestly, watching global elites dressed up in robes and burn effigies in front of a giant owl statue is weird, regardless of what it's supposed to represent. I think there's something there. And here's the thing that gets me, right? They've been doing this for decades, exposed, documented, photographed, and they still keep doing it. If it was just some silly ritual, why are they continuing to do it? They are doing it to this day. These are some of the most powerful people on the planet. They don't waste time on things that don't produce results. So either they're getting something out of this, or there's a deeper layer here we're just not seeing. Either way, the fact that Epstein's close associates are confirmed members of this club tells you something about the world he operated in. While there is no document in the 2026 dump explicitly stating Epstein was at the Grove, his close associates, former presidents, and financiers are confirmed members. Then there are first-hand accounts of Epstein's compound and the FBI hotline spreadsheet, which means these are unverified claims, but are still worth noting. Several people called in tips and described the energy of Little St. James Island and Zorro Ranch in New Mexico as demonic or heavy with evil. One tip from a former staff member at the New Mexico ranch claimed they found strange symbols and animal remains in areas of the property that were off limits to most workers. Once again, these are claims from the hotline, so make of that what you will. Then there's the breeding project itself, which we'll save for the next entry. It is absolutely insane, but in summary, it implies that life itself was a commodity to Epstein, something to be manufactured and exploited and potentially discarded. Then there's also Epstein's documented attendance and, quite frankly, obsession with high society masked events, which has led many to believe that the ritualistic gatherings depicted in films like Eyes Wide Shut were literally depictions of the circles Epstein moved in. Many people online have theorized the creator of Eyes Wide Shut knew too much because he died just days after showing the final cut to Warner Bros. Now, officially he died of a heart attack at 70, so take that theory with a grain of salt, but the timing has always felt weird and suspicious to a lot of people, and it's a whole other rabbit hole in and of itself. And whether or not Epstein was involved in literal child sacrifice, the patterns in the files suggest he was operating within a system that views human beings, especially children, as objects, like things to be discarded. So far, we haven't gotten any clarification from the DOJ of any of this. Our imagination is allowed to run wild currently, and that is exactly what's happening. Next up, we have Epstein's breeding project. I don't think this is speculation. Like, we have verifiable documents proving that Epstein wanted to strengthen the human gene pool by spreading his own DNA. And according to testimony from scientists and reporting from the New York Times, Epstein discussed plans to have up to 20 women at a time impregnated with his sperm at the Zorro Ranch near Santa Fe. He genuinely believed he possessed superior genes. And among the released documents is a diary entry from an alleged victim who describes giving birth around age 16 or 17. At least that's what I can make out from the entries. According to her account, she was with the baby for a very short amount of time before the child was taken from her, and says incredibly dark and disturbing things like, and I'm not lying, I'm not kidding when I say this, I am not your personal incubator. Ghislaine Maxwell was allegedly present too, and we can find a 20-week ultrasound scan included in the files alongside this diary. Now, if the diary wasn't already bad enough, throughout the FBI tip line records and victim statements scattered across these 3.5 million pages, there are dozens of separate accusations describing pregnancy, forced abortions, and children being taken. Different women, different time periods, different locations, but pretty much the same accusations. We have documented proof he wanted to do this. We have multiple sworn testimonies of it happening, and we have dozens of unverified claims describing the exact same thing. One or two accusations of the same thing, that's not a good look, right? But that could be a coincidence. But when you have the same type of allegation appear over and over and over again from different sources who had no contact with each other, that's a pattern. So then the question becomes, what is in those heavily redacted health records within the files? There are multiple health records that can be found within the files that are basically just black boxes because it's all redacted. If Epstein was actually attempting to execute this breeding plan, there would have to be extensive medical documentation of it. You can't run an operation like this without records like tracking, monitoring, examinations, births. Those files would have to exist somewhere. And I believe they do exist. We're looking at them, but it's just behind these black boxes. And I honestly wouldn't put it past him to do something like this. We have seen time and time again, with great wealth comes great evil. He had enough money to do basically anything he really wanted to do, and we can see that clearly through the victim testimonies and the diary entries found throughout these files. And finally, we have Trump's tightness rating, and oh boy, get ready for this one. This one is rough. Now, I want to preface this entry by saying these are incredibly serious allegations, and they may or may not be true because these claims are from the hotline, which means they are unverified. Also, these were anonymous tips called in right before the 2020 election, so make of that what you will. But what I said previously does also apply here. One or two allegations of the same thing, not a good look, but over a dozen separate tips to the FBI describing similar behavior, that's a pattern, and we recognize patterns pretty well. Trump's name appears hundreds of times across the files in flight logs, call records, emails, and FBI interview summaries. Now, appearing in someone's files doesn't mean you did anything wrong, but when you combine that with over a dozen separate tips to the FBI hotline describing the same allegations, you can't just dismiss this. But one of the most disturbing revelations buried in the files involves Donald Trump and his alleged participation in raping underage girls. According to the tip included in the document release, Trump was present at multiple Epstein properties where he and other men would allegedly rape young girls based on physical attributes, including what they refer to as tightness. I'll let you figure out what that means. The testimony describes these ratings as casual, almost transactional conversations between powerful men discussing girls the way you discuss cars or real estate. It wasn't just about appearances, it was about evaluating them as commodities, objects to be assessed and graded. And it isn't just Trump being mentioned in the files. His name, along with Bill Clinton and Prince Andrew, appears hundreds of times across flight manifest, call logs, and FBI interview summaries. Now, whether or not Clinton and Prince Andrew were also involved in this alleged tightness measurement is still up in the air, but still, dude, like the sheer frequency these names pop up suggests they weren't just acquaintances or occasional guests. They were deeply embedded in Epstein's operations for years. Flight logs show repeated trips to Epstein's properties, call records show constant communication, and witness testimonies place them at events where these kinds of discussions allegedly took place. The files paint a picture of a network of powerful men who viewed young girls not as human beings but as rank-rated and categorized products. And once you begin to dive deep into what Epstein's operations actually entailed, the breeding project, the trafficking infrastructure, the systematic abuse, the corruption, you begin to understand why this level of involvement is so detrimental to these people. Before I wrap this up, I have a few honorable mentions, things that are circulating online that I want to address because people are either taking them way too seriously or completely misunderstanding what they're really looking looking at. First, let's talk about this girls for the win email you've seen from Elon Musk. That specific screenshot is fake. Trust me, I was there. He did not send this email. No, seriously, it's not anywhere in the 3.5 million pages. But what is real are the verified emails in dataset 9, where Elon asked Epstein, what night is the wildest party on your island? Which is a wild question coming from someone who originally claimed to have turned down party invites. So Epstein was involved with him in some sort of fashion. Next up, we have the chicken photo. Okay, so some of you have undoubtedly seen this photo floating around from the files showing two large chickens and what looks like some kind of what people are claiming to be a naked child in the middle. And people are claiming this as proof of human experimentation or something of the sort. But I have the unredacted picture right here, and it's just a meme. Like, it's just an old meme. It's actually pretty funny. And finally, the wildest one. Many of you are seeing the clips about Hillary Clinton and the other women on a yacht cutting off a young girl's face, cutting out her intestines, eating her feces, and eating babies, and all of those things and stories. And all of this is found in the hotline logs, and the DOJ has not confirmed any of this. Now, if all of these claims actually did happen, do I think the DOJ would confirm them at all? No, but presenting them as fact when they are clearly coming straight from an unverified hotline that anyone's crazy uncle can call is just not the way to go about this. I mean, there is more than enough real, verified, and disturbing content in these files for people to go to jail without us chasing hotline fever dreams. The whole point of this Iceberg video series is to show there is real evil documented in these files. The breeding project, the trafficking infrastructure, the decoy protocols, the powerful names showing up over and over and over again. We don't need to make stuff up. The truth seems to already be dark enough. So stay sharp. Don't trust everything you see. I'll be dropping part 2 of this series soon.